Good morning and welcome back to DSP Leaders World Forum. It's day 4, Thursday the 14th of May, and coming up now is our session on people and processes for cloud native telcos. Before we start, a reminder that if you want to ask questions later or join the extra short with Ray LeMaitre programs, then you need to get in touch with us today. Details are here on the TelecomTV site, along with our latest poll question. And so moving on to our panel, people and processes for cloud native telcos. Technology innovation is only part of the evolution from CSP to DSP. Service providers need to fundamentally reevaluate and overhaul their approach to people and processes. Service provider culture and working practices that have served CSPs well for decades have been found to be inadequate for any operator who's serious about transforming their business into a leaner, agile and more dynamic operation. But of course, this could be easier said than done. So let's see what our panelists have to say. And I'm delighted to introduce Heather Kirksey, who is VP Community and Ecosystem Development with the Linux Foundation. Sumit Verdi, who is Senior Director Solutions Management, Telco and Edge Cloud at VMware. And Marcus Brunner, Head of Standardization at Swisscom. Hello everybody, thanks for joining us this morning.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Hello, Guy.
A key takeaway from our Cloud Native Telco event, which we held last December, was that we can't focus so much and exclusively on technology. We can't overlook the importance of people and processes in this transformation. Marcus, you were there and attending that event. You heard this constant reference to people and processes. How important is this and why?
Yeah, it's extremely important, and it's sort of part of the story. I mean, I'm more the techie guy, but it's overall, it's a combination of all of it. These are these different trends which accumulate in the same thing. I mean, one is really the technology needs to be ready for doing it, and then people need to be ready and be able to do it, and the processes need to be adapted to go more digital, which we as an operator not completely used to so far, but like moving towards over the last few years already. So, I mean, this combination of all of that is really needed.
Great. And Heather, people and processes, this must be bread and butter to the open source community.
Definitely. From the beginning with our open source projects in Telcom, we really focused on things like CI/CD and automated testing and all of those technical things, and we've really seen sort of the cultural embrace of that by a lot of our developers, which I think is great because you're sort of getting pockets of people who are getting more used to these sorts of processes, and then they're able to bring them back home to their organization. And I think that that's been tremendously helpful because it's been sort of maybe a safer place to experiment with some of these ideas around processes and to build up the sort of people culture around working that way.
And Sumit, why are you saying the importance of people and processes now within the telecoms community?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, in line with the previous comments over here, I think, clearly, I think technology is moving at a much faster pace than, processes and people can actually keep up with it. And, as you see, CSPs are actually adopting a new cloud paradigms, for their computing. And as such, that whole service distribution is basically happening kind of across their core edge and now into the customer premise environment as well. So the approaches that have basically been taken around very siloed strategies and so forth are fundamentally not going to scale. And when we start taking a look at examples around network operations, or basically sort of take a look at how workload lifecycle and so forth really need to be addressed in this future multi-cloud type of environments. People processes basically become very important. And I think one of the key inherent thing that I would probably add is, automation will basically become key as part of the shift. And along with this automation, of course, comes that change in the mindset in people. And they really need to start trusting the machine, right? So that is sort of some of the, the aspects of the challenges that would really need to be, overcome in terms of both some of the business and the operational approaches in terms of how these multi-cloud environments are going to be managed and dealt with in the future.
And Heather, when we talk about processes and consider processes, it's not long before we come across terms like DevOps and CI, CD. For a number of telcos or people within telcos, that might be a little bit alien. That the talk, this is a new language, new terminology. Can you explain first of all exactly what we're talking about here? When we talk DevOps and CI/CD, what does it refer to?
Yeah, so from a CI/CD perspective, what you're talking about is sort of continuous small changes to your infrastructure and potentially your applications that are continuous. So instead of big forklift upgrades, the way that we're perhaps used to, you're pushing small changes all the time, and that you're using automated tool sets that have built-in gates and certain validation at various points. So you're sort of also removing some of the possibility for human error, because you're setting up automated testing, you're testing your changes, and then you're pushing them out in a far more, the C in CI/CD does stand for continuous. And so you're doing it on a more continuous basis. And the advantages are that it really makes your system overall more stable, even though it is changing on a more regular basis. And it's considered one of the sort of defining principles of cloud native architecture, according to the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which houses Kubernetes and a large number of other open source cloud native technologies.
Marcus, this has an impact on technology, doesn't it? Because we do tend to work in silos. We have, across our end-to-end workflow, we do have different demarcation points, and it seems like we've got to get rid of those and look to try and achieve this end-to-end workflow. Are we still some distance, collectively as an industry, are we still some distance away from getting rid of those silos and creating this end-to-end structure?
Yeah, I believe we are quite a bit away. And the reason being that, in the telco industry, there are these sort of suppliers and operators and customer type of triangle, which makes it more difficult. You start having more boundaries in between. The contractual relationships are not completely clear. And then sort of processes need to run across legal organizations. If VMware sells us something, across that boundary, there needs to be CI/CD as well. Or some of the processes need to change, or the collaborative model needs to change somehow. And there we are just at the very beginning to start looking in the different ways on how to do that. Who gives what guarantees? Having changes is good, and having like small changes on the way, all of that is good. At one point in the business world, you need to have certain guarantees of whatever kind. And then it's unclear who is responsible for what at one point in time. So putting that together and get the right framework around that CI/CD in a multi-party environment is a bit of a challenge.
Thanks, Marcus. Sumit, how can you, as a partner to CSPs, how can you help with this? How do you go about trying to help them break down these barriers?
Yeah, I think if you look at the structures today, what you see is essentially organizational boundaries are sort of tied to technology boundaries. So fundamentally, of course, at a macro level, you've got the IT and the network boundaries, so to speak, and then within that, you've essentially got sort of that next layer of specialization. In the radio access space, as an example, or an MPLS kind of backbone core. And then, of course, now you get into further specializations even across these multi-clouds with respect to edge core and how do you basically sort of, operate with the hyperscalers and so forth as well. And so we start basically developing these specializations sort of within these organizational boundaries and so forth as such, right? So as a vendor over here, essentially, we're looking at, methodologies in terms of being able to look at simplifications that we can actually instrument into the technologies and abstract away sort of those complexities such that they're more human consumable, if you will, at higher layers over here. And so kind of essentially it's changing the paradigm with the service providers in terms of moving away, or perhaps even having a little bit of a bridge between these vertical siloed based approaches to something that is more manageable at a horizontal plane.
And Heather, what's been your experience when you're working with not only the open source community, but you've got your service providers in there as well, your telcos in there, how they are reacting to these new processes and methodologies that are coming, well, downstream, upstream? I forget which way the stream goes these days.
They're coming from somewhere in the stream, Guy. We've actually been quite, I think, pleasantly surprised at seeing the engagement on a lot of the stuff. We have a lot of operators who are very active in sort of some of our CI/CD projects and helping CI/CD within the open source. And that has really started translating into their own internal operations. Orange, for example, has given us some presentations on how they're doing CI/CD internally, based on sort of what they participated in the rest of the community in helping design in OPNFV, for example. And so, we are definitely seeing folks beginning to take it up. I know China Mobile, for example, is very active in the CD Foundation, which is another foundation specifically focused on CI/CD. And so, we're really seeing operators, begin to get in there and really, because they see the value of the automation and the reduction in downtime for the introduction of smaller changes as opposed to large ones. So, we do tend to work with some of the more forward-looking people within organizations, obviously in the open source community, but we've seen a great embrace of that. And some of the other stuff that we're trying to do too, because we are telco, we do have regulatory requirements, we do have expectations, is that we've really been working on creating compliance and verification programs as well. And we started that with the OpenStack VM side. But we actually are in the process of doing the same thing, focused both on sort of the software platform as well as applications, or CNS, cloud native functions. So we're trying to also, come to the telecom industry where it is, and understanding that things like compliance are important, compliance programs are important, and figure out how to meld those and that type of thing that telecom is used to doing, and that type of stringent testing and rigorous testing that we're used to, how those can also be incorporated into this new style of working and sort of help accelerate the operators as well as their vendor partners as they're trying to embrace cloud native and get there more quickly.
Thanks, Heather. Marcus, there's still a bit of a tendency to label cloud native as a tech evolution, but to what extent is this really an internal revolution that impacts so many parts of a CSP's business?
Yes, that's internally. I mean, there is different drivers internally as well. I mean, as soon as you go towards a more cloud-oriented technology, you start having more a horizontal layering of things. So you have like cloud infrastructure, and you have cloud applications, and the network functions, and so on and so forth. So I think these silos, like vertical silos of the different technologies, there we're going to see sort of this shift towards a more platform-oriented view of the telco networks and service platforms. So that's the one thing. The other thing is also that the people and organization is built according to that systems and this sort of vertical system. I think that has already been mentioned before, that the systems are very, very vertically concentrated and on particular functions, particular parts of the networks, like the access networks, the core network, the optical network, and so on. And all the things sort of start moving near to each other and get a more of a horizontal layering with some sort of abstraction in between. So from that perspective, I think there will be a certain change also internally. How far that's going to go, I mean, you need to still have certain organization around all that things. Even if you go agile, I mean, there are still Scrum teams around which do a certain part of the system. So a certain level of organization is there, and how this is going to be developed will be seen in the future.
Sumit, if I can turn to you, how far should we expect people to adapt to these complex new technologies? Are we at a stage where we need to make our future operations, I guess, more human compatible?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the key aspects that we need to try and take a look at, as in, how this is sort of it's a never solvable problem where technology is actually, growing at a pace, consumers aren't actually, users of the technology aren't able to keep abreast of it, right? And so, as such, there has to be that, that simplification that really needs to be introduced in there. In addition to that simplification, I think there is also aspects of, how can we basically bring capabilities to the service provider environments that can actually be, have a faster sort of turn up, if you will, and ability to be able to sort of, achieve a degree of agility, if you will. So some of the steps that we're actually taking is essentially sort of looking at that consistency, putting across different, cloud environments in terms of the technology stacks, coming up with, reference architectures and blueprints that actually do define an approach that you can take this technology into the service provider network environments at a much faster cadence. You also sort of take a look at the ecosystem as well now, which is no longer kind of a turnkey solution coming from a single vendor. It's becoming a multi-vendor service offer over here. As such, how do you essentially sort of create that efficiency by way of introducing, new software loads, different vendors, and so forth in this ecosystem? As such, things like certification programs and so forth, either be it in the open source industry space or, from, software platform vendor providers like ourselves, essentially sort of, driving that agility to be able to bring those solutions to the service provider. Sort of some of the initial steps over here that, we can essentially help service providers circumvent some of the challenges with this constant evolution in technology.
And Marcus, you were nodding when Sumit was talking there about systems integrators, I think. Let's come on to this point now. How important is it to develop and extend these external relationships with either your vendor partners or systems integrators, whoever they might be, rather than keep it within the four walls of the telco?
I think that's more important, is as it was just said, there are more components coming together to build certain services. So there needs to be a certain level of integration. And the complexity, how complex the services get, depends largely on how well the APIs are defined and probably even standardized between these components, how the sort of platform APIs, how much they are really standardized, or it's common practice to use those, which all of that would make the things much easier to integrate to each other. At the moment, there is still a lot of free flow in the market on that. There's not the particular exact design ready yet, where everybody would agree we go down that road. So there's still a bit of the finding way. But I believe the way the technology is going, the softwareization of the whole telco infrastructure will actually help, together with a lot of different partners, to build these services much quicker than we used to do.
Heather, are systems integrators getting involved at in the project stage of foundations such as LFN?
Yeah, we have several system integrator partners who are members of LF Networking. And certainly I know that they're also consuming the technology, that we're producing, and some of the, best practices that we end up experiencing as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think they have definitely a very important role to play in this ecosystem. As everyone says, there's a lot more integration, necessary as you have these sort of, software stacks made of different components. So yeah, I think that they're key.
And Sumit, when we look at these processes, I assume that these are processes that have got to scale. They've got to be able to be rethought into scalable processes that can adapt to future requirements rapidly.
Yeah, absolutely, right. If you take a look at the ecosystem over here with such highly distributed environments, you need the ability to be able to now kind of provide the right tooling. I think in terms of layered approach, as was mentioned, you essentially start with that simplification of the infrastructure, sort of those abstraction layers, and essentially sort of drive that up into the intelligence, up into some of the higher order toolings, if you will. So if you start taking a look at things like orchestration type of functions or assurance type of functions and so forth, that essentially sort of sit at the higher layers, are actually able to now scale out to be able to manage these distributed computing environments in a manner that is fairly consistent across, again, bringing in even the likes of the web scalers and so forth as well, into the overall kind of service delivery paradigm. The newer services, as we see out there, are no longer kind of constructs that are delivered out of a single data center. Any simple voice data services are now basically being delivered through a combination of multiple data centers. And as such, the requirements around low latencies and essentially sort of even cost considerations and so forth are driving the shift in terms of high degrees of distribution. So I think from a scale perspective, absolutely a very pertinent and an absolute must that needs to be factored into the technology evolution.
Marcus, processes need people. People need skills. How is the skill set for the requirements of a digital services provider fundamentally different from what we've had to date?
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult question. Sort of what I think it's one difference in skill sets is really more the software part. So you want to have more software skills. I think this working in an agile way, working in a more DevOps way, there are people, at least the older generations, are not used to that way of working. So that needs a sort of a learning curve. On the other hand, if we hire new guys into the company, most of them expect that, and they would not join a Swisscom if this would not happen this way in Swisscom either. So I think it's sort of like two-sided there. Then let me quickly make a comment to the speaker beforehand on the sort of the integration and scaling up. I mean, the whole model of cloud nativeness is basically trying to scale up everything. So it makes easier, simpler, all the processes, making them simpler and scale them. If you have many pieces of somehow similar things, it's very easy to scale. If all the things are different and all the processes are different, it's very difficult to scale. So I think this cloud native paradigm is actually really the key is to scale it. Just to mention this as well.
Heather, moving across to you, same question really about skills and the skills that are required. And will all this automation in our networks kind of edge out the more experienced and longer serving members of the community in favor of those who are more, adapt quicker to this new way of working?
Well, one of the things that we've actually seen sort of in the open source community, within LF networking is that, we've got a lot of people who've been in the industry for quite some time who have joined in. And, what I've actually seen is a lot of folks who have years of experience under their belts, years of maybe standards experience, not open source experience under their belts, who are really sort of embracing this. When I came into OPNFV specifically about 5.5 years ago, I mean, we were teaching ourselves really how to use things like Git and Garrett and our CI/CD tool chain. And now those are just such accepted sort of things that everyone understands that we need to do. And these are not sort of, we have a vibrant intern program. So we are getting some younger folks in, but, these are not necessarily a bunch of kids right out of college. These are the existing sort of, telecom architects and engineers who are participating, and we're really seeing them kind of transform their own skill set as they've been active, sort of across, all of our projects within LFN. So, I mean, I feel fairly bullish that, even more experienced folks can really kind of take on these new paradigms and these new technologies, and really run with them, because I've personally seen that with a lot of folks, in the industry who are really learning, and there's a sense of excitement about having something new to learn and a place to grow. For a long time, maybe what they've been doing had been a little stagnant, when telecom wasn't changing quite as rapidly. And so, I've seen people at all kind of stages of life really embrace it, at least, from my perspective of the folks that are showing up in the standards and open source.
There's hope for me yet, then, is there, Heather?
I've been saying, Guy, for a very long time.
Yeah. Marcus, you want to just come on the back of that?
Yes, I wanted to comment something. I mean, if you talk about the open source communities, I mean, that's like a bit of almost like a standards organization. There was always the case that, I mean, you need more senior people going at these places. I mean, you need to have a bit more of an overview. It's not only technology, it's a bit of politics, a bit of communication, a bit of everything else together as well. So people out of college, they typically are not sent to a standards body. Also in the old days, that has not happened. So it needs a certain seniority level to be able to go into that organizations. So I think that's what Heather was sort of experiencing also with OPNFV. I was more talking about the company itself. I mean, the newer guys, they just, you don't need to teach them 5 years on how it works. That's sort of like what they bring along anyway. So I think this is the difference. But I'm not saying that nothing of that can be learned. I mean, it's not really rocket science, all this tooling and so on. You just need to get the time to learn it and how to use it. It's not like not possible to do, even for people like my and your age, Guy.
Sumit, are you finding with, your company's got a wealth of experience in a number of technology sectors, not least the virtualization side, but are you finding your skill sets more in demand from your telco partners?
Yes, and that was a comment I was going to add as well. I think, clearly it's not a trivial problem to solve, right? And I think as we start if you take, for example, containers as an example, right? The latest kid on the block over here, right? How do you basically build, deploy, and manage containerized type environments? In this cloud native paradigm shift over here, it is a daunting task if you start looking at it. And so certainly, I think, trying to get that skill set around it, I think is something that is, time based, where people will eventually come up to speed as, such technologies become the norm of the future. As a stopgap, multiple approaches, we believe service providers can take, and something that we've been doing kind of quite closely with, our service provider customers as well, is essentially sort of, leading the way with essentially sort of becoming that technology partner, if you will, as opposed to just a sheer, vendor or supplier of products and tools. So in this partnership mindset, we're finding, things like I previously alluded to, reference architectures, best practices, blueprints, and so forth, are going a long way in terms of essentially sort of, working with our customers in a partnership mindset, as opposed to, just another, a step in the overall supply chain, if you will. And to that matter as well, I think where appropriate, bring in managed service providers as well that can essentially help with that stopgap, until those internal skill sets can actually be developed. And I think another consideration for the service providers also is, they need to also sort of see that balance in terms of, how much of this stuff do they actually do in-house versus, leverage, the best of breed ecosystem that exists outside of their four walls.
I'd like to ask each of you a final question, if I may. How confident are you that telcos, service providers will be able to get the right people, put the right processes in place, do all this quickly in a timely manner, all the while competing for talent against a wealth of other companies that are probably more sexier opportunities for a lot of graduates and new entrants to the workplace? I'd like to ask how confident you think the industry is, the telco industry is, in putting people and processes in place. Marcus, if I can start with you.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that this is possible to do. I mean, we have had that same problem with any new technology over the last 100 years in the telco industry. I mean, it's not like that we were not changing anything. I think will just go on. We're gonna learn. It takes its time. I don't know how the competitive landscape will change that. On the other hand, in telecom there is also like quite stable stuff, like cables and fibers and towers and stuff like that, which is sticking around. Sort of like building up that new is not done by software. So there is a physical part of the producing telecom services is around as well, which is not easy to replicate. I think both of these drivers are good, and we need to be more agile and go quicker as we can, going more into digital services and so on. But I'm not afraid that this is a big issue for the telecom industry. And we were used to change. We are used to adopt new technologies on the way.
Thanks, Marcus. And Heather, are we able to put people and processes in place?
And I certainly think so, or I would not be doing the job that I am. But I mean, I really do see sort of, a lot of adoption, a lot of interest in moving this, working with the folks that I do who are really looking at the cloud native technologies and processes. The folks that I interact with, really seem to be getting a handle on it and, really sort of evangelizing the ability to do this. So, I also definitely remain confident that we'll be able to figure it out. And I think that, being able to use, groups like standardization bodies, groups like open source organizations to sort of teach each other, and, we're already sort of breaking down sort of silos within those organizations, amongst, different projects, amongst, people from different companies. And so I really, I see a lot of what we're talking about occurring on a daily basis in the world in which I live. And so I feel quite confident that we'll be able to do it and figure it out.
Thanks, Heather. And finally, Sumit, the CSPs and people and processes, are there any alarm bells that are ringing with you? Anything they need to be watched out for? Or are you also confident that they will put these in place in a timely way?
Yeah, I think they will definitely get them in place, right? People, processes, and so forth will definitely happen. And I think it is a journey. I think the question in our mind is, what does that journey look like, and how, we from a technology perspective can actually kind of accelerate and also de-risk it. So I think, if you summarize kind of, the thinking about this cloud native transformation over here, from a technology perspective, either we can continue to keep exposing that complexity and the technology, to the consumers of it, or we can basically apply that kind of the more pragmatic, human consumable kind of layering on top of it. Put in that simplification, introduce some of the model-driven abstractions and so forth. Expose what is actually relevant, and with that relevance, you can essentially sort of then build automation, which is going to basically be key as part of the agile services. And this is fundamentally sort of what is going to help with the people and the processes to essentially be more effective in terms of what they're trying to do. And then also this de-risks, and we're looking at sort of a near-term horizon in terms of the latest technologies that are out there right now. But what happens 3 years from now when we actually have, or 2 years from now when we actually have, new technology players, coming about? Is this another new skill set that needs to be, learned and so forth? So from our perspective, we're essentially trying to see is how can we basically sort of, put in that simplification and create, and hide some of these complexities, if you will, and make the relevant pieces sort of more, amenable, programmable, and so forth, such that the people processes are kind of, more efficient and consistent, essentially sort of, making this journey a lot shorter than it really needs to be.
Sumit, thank you very much. And Heather and Marcus, also thank you very much for joining us on Telecom TV. Much appreciated. If you have any questions for our guests or any additional comments or views you wish to add, then please get in touch with us. And if you want to be part of the ongoing conversation, then you need to join us on our new discussion programme, Extra Shot, with Telecom TV's editorial director, Ray Lemaitre. Get in touch with us now through social media or email. Otherwise, please take a look at the sessions that we've already held. They are all available for on-demand viewing now, right here on Telecom TV. And we'll be adding future videos to the archive as the week progresses. Coming up next on DSP Leaders World Forum 2020 is our session on digitalization for sustainability. And you'll be able to watch that later today from 12 noon UK time. But for now, a final thank you to our panelists and to you for watching. Thank you and goodbye.